For those who came on time, we give you brownie points. We were going to serve coffee, but then we thought you were way awake, so you didn't need that. So welcome and good morning. Welcome to the Inter-American Dialogue for this conversation on the Honduran presidential elections. Central America has never stopped to be an interesting, fun, conflictive, complicated, and all of the above region with so many challenges that sometimes it's hard to come with an approach that allows you to sort out the priorities in the policy agenda and the solutions that you need to address. Sometimes it's migration, sometimes it's crime, sometimes it's political polarization, sometimes it's concentration of power. Yesterday, the El Salvadoran government released the closing of 179 NGOs. It's sort of a deja vu for Central America with the closing of NGOs in Nicaragua that turned out to be close to 6,000 nonprofit organizations closed. Guatemala is again in a political struggle over how to deal with growing crime. And of course, Costa Rica is dealing with some demons relating to organized crime and delinquency. That goes to extremes that you will never have considered. People hiring gun for hire for $200 to kill someone. And Nicaragua, as you all are familiar with, is a country that has gone to the extremes of radicalism, and I call it tropical Talibanism, that the region to some extent is not even mentioning to the problems and the extent of the situation in which they are. And then we have elections in Honduras. This is going to be an interesting development. The political process already identifies several candidates in a political struggle to gain the confidence of the electorate in a highly polarized and very toxic environment in a country that historically is highly polarized. So it's hard to comprehend how things are taking place. And so we are pleased to have a couple of colleagues. My colleague Eric Jacobstein will be moderating the panel. And then we have two magnificent speakers who will be joining us in the conversation and addressing some of the challenges that Honduras faces for the Honduran presidential election. So with that, welcome, and Eric, it's all yours.
Much, Manuel, and really appreciate, as always, your great leadership on Central America and putting the elections in Honduras at the top of the agenda here at the dialogue. Before I introduce our extraordinary panel, I thought it would be useful, since we're sitting here in Washington, to sort of give a sense of why the November election in Honduras really matters from a national security perspective here in the United States. Not only is Honduras a necessary partner on migration management, on counter-narcotics, but sitting in central Honduras is the Soto Cano Air Base, which, as many of you know, is a military installation that is really a leading space for humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, other operations within the region, run by the Honduran Air Force, something that where the United States is present. Soto Cano is a real critical space for the United States. In 2023, President Castro in Honduras reversed years of precedent by switching from recognizing Taiwan to recognizing the PRC, China. But that said, strong military cooperation persists between our nations. And it's particularly essential for this cooperation to continue in the years ahead, particularly as we see the increasing PRC presence throughout Central America, throughout the Western Hemisphere in general. I also think it's worth noting the importance of the U.S.-Honduras extradition relationship and holding drug kingpins accountable. This is something that is really essential, not necessarily getting the so-called small fish who operate drug boats or drug planes, but really getting the truly big fish who run multi-million, or in some cases, multi-billion-dollar drug empires. And really, to put it more simply, without a strong extradition partnership, there's no way that Juan Orlando Hernandez would be sitting in a jail cell in the United States, serving time for massive drug trafficking operations. So for these reasons, among many others, I believe that Honduras's November election merits significant attention from the United States, from the executive branch, from members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, and of course, also the Organization of American States and the European Union. And I know we'll get into that in our conversation today. We've of course seen elections go sideways in Honduras. In 2017, I think being the most blatant example of fraud when the OAS determined that there was significant electoral fraud in the country. So which is all the more reason for the international community to pay attention to what's happening in Honduras in the coming days. So with that backdrop, what I'd like to do is introduce our distinguished panel here who can go much deeper on the issues that matter most in the country's upcoming elections between the three leading candidates from the Libre, Liberal, and National parties. So let me go ahead. First, of course, is Deborah Ulmer, who we're thrilled to have here, who's the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the National Democratic Institute, has more than 20 years of experience managing a range of democracy assistance and human rights programs, most recently coming from Freedom House as Director of the Latin American Caribbean region, and also as Chief of Party for a USAID Office of Transition Initiative program in Nicaragua. And I first got to know Deborah, I think, in Honduras when she served as the Senior Director there for the region in Honduras from 2014 to 2018. Was obviously there during those 2017 elections and knows the country extremely well. So we're thrilled to have you here, Deborah. And then, of course, virtually, we are thrilled to have Gabriela Castellanos with us, who's joining us, who I think everybody who follows Honduras knows well and knows of her incredible work. She's the Executive Director of the National Anti-Corruption Council in Honduras, which is a civil society organization in the country that is really dedicated to studying, training, dissuading, denouncing, and combating corruption. Gabrielle is also a columnist for El Heraldo, the newspaper in Honduras, where she raises awareness on all these critical topics, as well as regional issues. Last but certainly not least, in terms of her connections here with Washington, the credibility she has. In December 2021, Gabriela was internationally recognized as an anti-corruption champion by the State Department. So Gabriela, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here as well. And last but not least, of course, is the Dialogue's own Manuel Orozco, who you all know, who's the director of the Migration, Remittances, and Development Program here. Also serves as a senior fellow at Harvard at their Center for International Development, and as a senior advisor for the International Fund for Agriculture Development. And Manuel is the leader on remittances in the region and many sort of economic spaces, and we'll delve more deeply into some of the economic issues that matter to the Honduran electorate. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. I'll ask a few questions and obviously look forward to opening it up to the audience as well. My first question for all the panelists really is, as we sit here, as we mentioned today, we're 82 days before the general elections in Honduras. I'd really ask you to address three main questions. First, what is your assessment of the state of the presidential race and what predictions, if any, do you have? Second, what do each of you really see as the main challenges in the election process, and how can these challenges be resolved? Is there still time? Is there still opportunity to do so in the coming days? And then third, getting at the points that I made at the top, why should Washington and the broader international community care about these upcoming elections? So Deborah, why don't we go ahead and start with you, and then we'll turn to Gabriela and Manuel. And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First, I want to thank the Inter-American Dialogue, Manuel and Eric in particular, for inviting me and for highlighting Honduras, which has not received a lot of attention in Washington. So I really appreciate this opportunity. I would say that at this stage, as Manuel pointed out, there are many contenders, but three leading contenders for the elections. Rixi Moncada of the Libre incumbent. She is a close ally of President Castro and former President Zelaya. She served as the Minister of Defense and Treasury and as a commissioner of the National Electoral Council in 2021 and I've had the privilege to work with her in these different capacities and other capacities in her party capacity. Nasra, or Tito Asfura, the National Party candidate, businessman and former mayor of Tegucigalpa. He ran for president in 2021 and quickly conceded. And Salvador Nasralla, Liberal Party candidate, television personality, and political outsider. He's run a few times for president, and in 2021 allied with Xiomara Castro, but later became a critic of her government. As the first woman of president of Honduras, President Castro's administration has delivered on some improvements, including on security as measured by homicides, down from 38 from 100,000 in 2022 and to 25 per 100,000 in 2024, according to Insight Crime. And the economy, as measured by GDP, increasingly by approximately 3.6% per year, according to the World Bank. However, Castro's achievements have been tarnished by the public's disappointment with her government's lack of progress on anti-corruption, in particular, her inability to fulfill the campaign promise of creating a UN-backed anti-corruption commission, and a leaked video of her brother-in-law discussing bribes with narco-traffickers. While public opinion polling in Honduras is generally biased, it's noticeable that some polls coincide in showing both Asfura and Nasralla 10 points or more ahead of Moncada. But it's also worth noting that the National Party candidates collectively won the most votes in the primaries, while Moncada won more votes than any other candidate, according to CNE data. Asfura has two challenges. The National Party was tainted by drug trafficking conviction of former President Juan Orlando Hernandez, as Eric mentioned, and some members of his party remain loyal to Hernandez. Meanwhile, Nasralla remains a popular figure, and while the Liberal Party still has a strong political machine, Nasralla is not rooted in this political structure. An alliance between Asfura and Nasralla could drastically change the political landscape. Yet that appears unlikely as long as either of them see a chance of winning on their own. And in this sense, the race is still unsettled, and each candidate has reasons to think that they could win. As for the main challenge facing the election, I would say it's political interference with the electoral institutions in particular. And the way to address this is through dialogue between the political actors that leads to agreements on how to manage the election. In fact, NDI held a pre-election assessment in Honduras between August 4th and the 8th, and we witnessed political dialogue leading to an agreement on the trip. So it is possible, and I'm happy that the CNE is now meeting as a collective again. The NDI pre-election mission sought to assess political and organizational challenges affecting the transparency and credibility of Honduras's election and offer recommendations to address them. Led by two former Latin American officials, Katia Uruona of Bolivia and Juan Carlos Galindo of Colombia, the mission included representatives from the National Endowment for Democracy and the International Republican Institute, as well as Republican and Democratic staff members from the House of Representatives. The team met with election officials, presidential candidates, civil society groups, including business and religious leaders, journalists, and members of the international community. The most common concern among these key actors was about political interference with key electoral institutions, especially the National Electoral Council, the CNE, which is responsible for organizing and administering the elections, but also with the Electoral Justice Tribunal, which handles electoral disputes, and the Clean Politics Unit, which covers campaign finance. But it's important to note that each of these institutions are led by 3-member panels or boards. And each of these institutions, each member is appointed by a political party that are perceived as party representatives and not public servants. This makes agreements within the election institutions exceedingly difficult. The solution to this challenge is rather straightforward, but at least on paper. The CNE needs to act without interference, and the party representatives need to put the constitutional responsibilities above their party interests. But there are a few things that are preventing this from happening, including deep polarization between the government and the opposition, deep distrust between political actors at all levels, and particularly within the CNE, and premature accusations of election fraud by all 5 political candidates, which reinforced the distrust and polarization. To begin to address these deeper challenges, there's an urgent need to promote ongoing dialogue between the 5 political parties contesting the elections and the electoral authorities to help de-escalate the rhetoric. Encourage active commitments to avoid premature accusations of fraud and wait for the definitive announcement of the results by the CNE before declaring winners or responsibly using legal channels to challenge the results. And to support the role of the Honduran civil society in observing their own elections to promote citizen participation and confidence in the electoral process. And I would agree with Eric on why Washington should care about Honduras. Stability in Honduras is important to the US for 3 reasons: migration, security, as Eric said, and trade and investment. If the elections lack transparency and credibility, there is a strong possibility of post-election violence that could undermine stability. There are 2 key precedents in Honduras: the 2009 constitutional crises that led to a coup d'etat against former President Zelaya, and the controversial 2017 elections marked by alleged fraud and significant post-election violence, for which Juan Orlando Hernandez was reelected for a 2nd presidential term. Honduras's democracy is vulnerable, given its lack of independence of the judicial system, pervasive corruption, organized crimes, infiltration of elections and government institutions, and ongoing threats to environmental and human rights activists and journalists. An election that lacks transparency and credibility could contribute to the regional trend of democratic backsliding that Manuel was mentioning. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Gabriela, why don't we turn to you?
Hi, good morning to all. ¿Me escuchan? Can you hear me? No. Hi. Huh? Hi, good morning to all. Good morning to all. It is truly an honor to join this space and extend my sincere gratitude to the dialogue for the invitation. This is a valuable opportunity to share perspective and foster reflection on the Honduras electoral process, as well as the broader context that surrounded. With your permission, I can answer the question in Spanish. Para la primera pregunta, ¿cuál es la valoración sobre el estado actual de la carrera presidencial y qué predicciones, si las tengo, puedo compartir? La verdad es que tengo que ser lo más honesta posible. El proceso electoral está siendo marcado por una profunda crisis de desconfianza ciudadana que genera escepticismo hacia la clase política. Y no es para menos, sobre todo porque los resultados de la contienda no se mide únicamente con datos cuantitativos, sino también por la cantidad o la calidad que las instituciones del Estado aportan a la organización y preparación de las elecciones. Y ahí, precisamente, la falla es altamente preocupante. Por ejemplo, yo puedo confirmar que para este momento, ni el Consejo Nacional Anticorrupción ni ninguna otra organización de sociedad civil cuenta con acreditación como observadores electorales internos. Y frente a esta y muchas otras debilidades institucionales, además, hay que soportar la ausencia de proyectos claros de nación, porque predominan en este momento las campañas centradas en confrontaciones, en promesas de corto plazo y pactos de conveniencia que poco contribuyen a fortalecer la democracia. Así que mi valoración es que estas elecciones están marcadas por dos elementos. Primero, una población cansada de la política tradicional que demanda integridad y resultados. Y segundo, el riesgo latente de que el desencanto se traduzca en abstención o en un voto de protesta que no necesariamente garantice la estabilidad institucional. Por lo tanto, hacer predicciones en un contexto tan volátil sería irresponsable de mi parte. Lo que sí puedo afirmar es que el resultado no dependerá únicamente de la maquinaria política, sino también de la capacidad de la ciudadanía de exigir transparencia, de vigilar el proceso como nunca y de votar con conciencia. En cuanto a la segunda consulta, ¿cuáles considera que son los principales desafíos en el proceso electoral y cómo pudieran resolverse? Pues los desafíos son múltiples, pero me permito resaltar al menos tres que considero que son altamente críticos. Primero es la desconfianza de las instituciones electorales. Lo ocurrido en el pasado 9 de marzo durante la jornada de elecciones primarias es un hecho que no podemos obviar, pues revela una grave debilidad institucional. La manipulación malintencionada en el transporte de las maletas electorales ocasionó un clima de peligro e incertidumbre sobre el ejercicio del voto en las principales ciudades del país, generando preocupaciones y muchas alertas de cara a las elecciones generales del 30 de noviembre. Sin embargo, lo verdaderamente lamentable es que hasta la fecha no se define la responsabilidad de los involucrados, porque pesa más la influencia del poder que el respeto al papel que debe cumplirse de manera institucional. El segundo desafío que yo puedo mencionar es el uso indebido de los recursos públicos y la compra de voluntades. En cada elección vemos cómo los bienes y los fondos del Estado se utilizan para campañas a favor del oficialismo que está de turno, debilitando la igualdad de condiciones entre los candidatos. Y el gobierno de la presidenta Castro resulta que no es la excepción, pues es innegable que todo el aparato estatal, incluido también los medios de comunicación gubernamentales, están siendo instrumentalizados para favorecer ilegalmente la campaña de la actual candidata oficialista. Y el tercer desafío y el último que puedo mencionar en este momento es el bloqueo a la observación electoral interna. No solo falta un reglamento de observación electoral, sino que también hay ataques dirigidos en contra de las organizaciones de sociedad civil, particularmente por el consejero del partido oficialista, que de manera abierta y directa pidió la exclusión del Consejo Nacional Anticorrupción y una investigación en mi contra. Todo este antecedente nos genera preocupación porque somos las organizaciones domésticas, conocemos de cerca la realidad del país y las que podemos detectar con mayor precisión prácticas que pueden poner en riesgo este proceso tan importante para Honduras. En síntesis, resolver estos desafíos en el contexto de las elecciones generales requiere dos cosas: voluntad política y apego estricto a la ley. Pero la mirada también debe ser a largo plazo, pues pasa por reformas legales para evitar que el proceso de selección de las autoridades electorales no se realice con tinte partidario. Y en la última pregunta, ¿por qué debería Washington y la comunidad internacional en general preocuparse por estas próximas elecciones? Honduras no es un país aislado. Lo que sucede en nuestras elecciones tiene repercusiones directas en la región. Hay al menos 3 razones por las que la comunidad internacional, desde mi punto de vista, debe prestar atención a este proceso. Número 1 es migración. La falta de oportunidades, la corrupción, la inseguridad son motores que expulsan a miles de hondureños cada año. Si las elecciones no lograran generar un cambio real en la forma de gobernar, la migración irregular continuará siendo un desafío humanitario y político para la región, especialmente para Estados Unidos. 2, la gobernabilidad y la estabilidad regional. La inestabilidad de Honduras no se queda en nuestras fronteras, afecta a Centroamérica y debilita los esfuerzos de integración regional. Es necesario reflexionar sobre el impacto que han generado las dinámicas autoritarias bajo esos esquemas de captura institucional, concentrando el poder y recurriendo a narrativas de socialistas para justificar el deterioro de la democracia y el condicionamiento de la política exterior, debilitando el proceso y recurriendo a emplear políticas de régimen izquierdista. Y esto impacta precisamente en una relación estratégica de toda Centroamérica, pero por supuesto también que a los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica. Y por último, me gustaría mencionar la lucha contra la corrupción y el crimen organizado. Honduras ha sido por años un territorio donde el narcotráfico y las redes criminales no solo han encontrado protección política, sino que también han colocado a ciertos actores en los diferentes poderes del Estado. Es de recordar que el crimen organizado ha penetrado la institucionalidad pública, teniendo la capacidad de influir en las autoridades hondureñas, para que nuestro territorio no solo se convierta en un productor de droga, sino en un espacio estratégico para el paso de narcotráfico que llega hasta los Estados Unidos, convirtiéndolo en un verdadero problema de salud pública. Por lo tanto, la elección de las nuevas autoridades será crucial para contrarrestar todos estos problemas.
Muchas gracias, Gabriela. ¿Puede escucharnos ahora? ¿Puede escucharnos en este momento? Ok, vamos a seguir con Manuel y después con preguntas a usted. Manuel, why don't we turn to you and hopefully we can get it so Gabriela can hear us. Manuel, do you want to provide any opening comments, and I'll turn some questions back?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to be brief. And I'll start with the backwards. I think the confluence of problems in Honduras eventually will have an effect on U.S. foreign policy in different ways. But the most important one, the current narrative of the State Department deals with what they call malign forces. The way in which you have extracontinental actors and organized criminal networks that basically are taking over the countries and having an impact on the U.S. national interest. One case in point is how Honduras is strengthening its relationship with China, mostly with the purpose in the short term to increase the political capital, in the long term to reconstruct a new economic elite in the country that goes parallel and displaces the local elite. The other issue is people talk about migration. Yes, there is an impact that we will see in 2021. We had 1/3 of Honduras with an intention to migrate. That had declined to 18% last year. And I suspect that even though migration will drop this year and the coming year, by 2027, there will be serious problems that will have an impact on migration. On the intention, not only on the intention to migrate, but also on problems of economic shortage. I suspect that it will be an economic contraction in 2026, And I'll touch back on that later. But the I think the main challenges uh, were mentioned by my colleagues, by Gabriela and Deborah, particularly how we translate with the issue of political interference that manifests in many ways. My concern is mostly that the current situation in Honduras is taking place in parallel ways. On the one hand, you see an electorate that is has lost confidence on Libre in terms of that there are cases of corruption, there are cases of abuses of political authority. So son iguales. No hay diferencia entre lo que Libre hizo and what has happened with the National Party. And that's a conclusion that the electorate has arrived at. I don't think that um, that will produce a definite decision against Libre, but there are signs that definitely many Hondurans who were pro-national party are going back to in that direction. And then there are also signs among the traditional liberal cohort to lend their support to Nastrada, despite the fact that he's not really a true liberal. But there is talk in the street among the electorate that Libre is not the optimal solution for them. Parallel to that, there is a very polarized, toxic political elite that Gabriela described, that Deborah also mentioned, that basically they are fighting among each other at the top levels. It's a serious fight that is having an effect on political institutions, completely uh, reducing the trust in the electoral system, and it, it doesn't show signs of uh, positive results post elections. That there is a conviction that Libre will commit fraud, and that you have to prepare not only before the elections that they happen, but that you're going to have to pick a fight after the elections because Libre is going to win no matter what. And that tension is visible at the top echelons. Unfortunately, there is the electorate is not interested in seeing that. And I think that's the main challenge. There is a state of denial in the population about in the political elites, excuse me, about what are the priorities. The economy, for example, um, the electorate want better quality of life, not just jobs. The conversation about jobs, it's irrelevant to them because the problem is in a country where 3/4 of your labor force is in the informal economy, what you want is a better quality of life, regardless of whether you have a formal or informal job. And the the elites are really in complete disregard. The second situation of denial, which is serious, is that migration has dropped. There is no economic solution in sight. And you will have this year at least 30,000 Hondurans deported. And next year, the number will be at least 20% higher than what is this year. But that means that there will be this year at least 30,000 households not receiving remittances in a country that has 1 million households receiving, depending on that flow. It may seem a small amount. In fact, uh, staff at the central bank sees this as meaningless. It's just 30,000. We have 1 million. So, what difference does it make? But it actually makes a big difference because in Honduras, private consumption is highly dependent on remittances, 35% today, because of the great flow of money that grew 20% this year, is increasing the dependency. So there is a denial. So you have that challenge and you have the challenge of political interference over the election.
Great. Thank you so much, Manuel. I want to see Gabriela. ¿Puede escucharnos ahora?
Les escucho, Eric.
Okay, perfecto. Excellent. Great news. Well, I think those are terrific opening remarks. And Gabriela, we missed a little bit, but I have a number of questions for you. So I think we'll make up for it. And obviously, feel free to answer in Spanish. But now that you've discussed some of the real challenges facing the electoral process, I'd like to hear your perception of some of the key Honduran institutions and the role that they will play in the elections. So we're talking about the Congress, the Attorney General. We've seen threats from the Attorney General's office and the Congress to investigate commissioners from the Consejo Nacional Electoral. And so how concerned are you about actions from the Attorney General, actions from the Congress that could really interfere with the electoral process?
Cuando hablamos de las elecciones, Eric, es imposible no detenernos en el papel de nuestras instituciones. Tratando de ser clara, el principal problema no es la ausencia de leyes, sino la falta de instituciones que actúen con independencia, con responsabilidad y compromiso con la ciudadanía. El Consejo Nacional Electoral tiene una enorme obligación de garantizar un proceso confiable, pero lo hace en medio de presiones políticas de manera constante. Lo que hemos visto en las últimas semanas y lo que tú muy bien lo dices, Eric, ese papel que juega la Fiscalía General, que en el último momento ha sido de constante amenazas. Y también desde el propio Congreso Nacional, para investigar con tinte partidario a 2 consejeros de los 3 que no pertenecen a la corriente oficialista. Es profundamente preocupante. ¿Por qué? Porque esos mensajes no son neutrales. Son intentos de intimidar y de debilitar a una institución que debería de tener el respaldo de todos los poderes del Estado en un momento tan delicado para Honduras. La Fiscalía General de Honduras, tristemente, ha sido una de las oficinas del Estado más cuestionadas en los últimos años. Su papel debería de ser un ente técnico y autónomo que investigue sin sesgos. Sin embargo, su historial demuestra, como en muchos otros casos, que ha funcionado como un instrumento político más que como un pilar de justicia. Ante unas elecciones, ese comportamiento no solo es dañino, sino que altamente peligroso, porque creo yo que mina la credibilidad de todo el proceso que debería de ser democrático. Por otro lado, el Congreso Nacional continúa operando como una arena de intereses partidistas y no como un contrapeso responsable. Cuando desde el legislativo se envían amenazas directas al órgano electoral, lo que en realidad se busca es ejercer control político sobre quienes deberían de garantizar la voluntad ciudadana. Esa creo yo que es una intromisión inaceptable desde esa mirada ciudadana. Tampoco podemos quitar la lupa del papel que jugará las Fuerzas Armadas, partiendo de un cuestionamiento o de una cuestionable participación en el caótico contexto del retraso de las maletas electorales durante las elecciones primarias en este año. Las expectativas es que sean garantes de que se desarrolle las elecciones en total libertad, con transparencia y sin interferencias, y que no lleguen a prestarse a intereses de ninguna corriente política partidaria. Su rol debe ser neutro y, por supuesto, que independiente, no sujeto a directrices de nadie. Ahora bien, tampoco se trata de quedarnos en el diagnóstico. Lo que corresponde es exigir garantías claras de independencia. Pues, ¿qué significa esto en la práctica? Primero, que las instituciones electorales puedan trabajar sin interferencias. Segundo, que la comunidad internacional mantenga una observación cercana y constante, porque la presencia internacional es importantísima y puede ser un factor de disuasión frente a quienes intenten manipular el proceso. Y tercero, que la ciudadanía asuma un rol de vigilancia activa, que los votos se defienden también con una presión social, con la denuncia responsable y con la resistencia pacífica frente a los abusos. En conclusión, yo quisiera decir que sí estamos preocupados porque cuando el Ministerio Público, el Congreso Nacional y las Fuerzas Armadas actúan como instrumentos de presión, ponen en riesgo la esencia misma de un proceso democrático.
Great. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to zoom out a bit and turn to you, Deborah, to talk a little bit about the role of the international community, the Organization of American States, the European Union, but also the United States, and just really to understand how important will the OAS, the European Union, and other electoral observers be to this process, but also, I think we talked about why Honduras matters at the top, and you really laid it out nicely. But do you think it does matter? Does this election matter to the Trump administration, to Republicans and Democrats in Congress? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Right, thank you. The presence of international observers like the OAS, the EU, Carter Center is important for a few reasons. It builds public confidence in the electoral process. Citizens tend to rely on international observers based on international principles, highlighting human rights and democratic rights. And in that vein, they promote civic and political rights by assessing whether a process is conducive to those rights and freedoms. And they amplify efforts by nonpartisan Honduran observation groups to provide factual information regarding the process. As Gabriela said, international observers and domestic observers should not stay in the diagnostic or a post-mortem audit. It is important that observers highlight the recommendations to move forward and always improving a political process. But international observers can play a role in facilitating dialogue as well as they did in the post-2017 process. Guided by the principle that citizens have a right to participate in their own governance and public affairs, NDI is supporting and has, since 2009 in Honduras, supported domestic election observation. And we do so by providing a proven methodology that has been conducted in more than 60 countries by more than 200 observers, 200 observation groups around the world in a process that's called the Process Results Verification for Transparency, PRVT, but it's also known in shorthand as a quick count, that helps citizen observers systematically verify the quality of the voting and counting processes in addition to the accuracy of the results. Furthermore, citizen observers can detect subtle dynamics, particularly at the local level, different from international observers, and citizen observation efforts can provide broader coverage and more sustained presence. While we were in Honduras, we heard a lot of terms to describe citizen observation, and if I could just take a minute to describe the different roles that are all important and complementary to one another. Election observers are affiliated with nonpartisan domestic or international groups, and their role is to collect data and issue public statements with recommendations for improving the electoral process in accordance with international principles. Their focus should be on ensuring that the will of the people is respected. Poll watchers are appointed by specific political parties and are primarily focused on recording voter turnout for their candidate or their party. Poll workers in Honduras are appointed also by the political parties. And so given that sometimes there's unequal representation at the different polling stations, there have been efforts to reform the system to ciudadanizar, or put citizens, nonpartisan political party folks, different from political party folks rather, at the polling stations via electoral reforms. Poll workers are responsible for guaranteeing the secrecy of the vote, preserving order during the voting and vote count processes, administering or admitting rather accredited observers, and transmitting the results to the CNE. The CNE transmits these preliminary results via their TREP system. But it's important to note that these results are not definitive, right? These are rapid results in an effort by the CNE, by different election management bodies throughout the world to make more transparent and more available more quickly the results of the elections. Now, despite many competing concerns in the US, we are seeing some signs of interest by the Trump administration and Republicans and Democrats in Congress. The embassy in Tegucigalpa has a new charge d'affaires who knows Honduras well, and our mission met with her and her team. And her team, they're tracking the elections very closely. And I understand that the administration is also sending a new deputy chief of mission in the coming days. Likewise, there's a bipartisan bill in the House of Representatives, and I congratulate Representative Salazar and Representative Castro for leading the charge on that, that calls for greater US engagement via international observers and domestic observers in these elections. And so, there is a lot of competing priorities right now in the US, but this is a critical topic. The elections are perceived, I think, as Manuel hinted, as existential to both the ruling party and the opposition. And there are concerns that, and this is one of our conclusions, that if the rhetoric is not toned down, if the agreements are not happening, and the elections cannot move forward smoothly, there are serious concerns about post-election violence that will affect the stability of Honduras. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah, and thanks for pointing out the strong bipartisan interest, which I think is extremely encouraging. And I think what you mentioned about political violence is a good segue to the next question I had for Gabriela, which is, really, I think, at the top of mind for a lot of folks, given the fact that Honduras is no stranger to electoral violence in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Gabriela, be interested in knowing from you how concerned you are about political violence, either from non-state actors, from the country's security forces, from colectivos, and what can really be done to prevent such violence.
Hablar de elecciones en Honduras sin hablar de seguridad sería ignorar una de las realidades más duras que enfrentamos. Nuestro país tiene una larga historia de violencia política, tanto en procesos electorales pasados como en el día a día de la vida cotidiana ciudadana. Esa violencia se manifiesta en varias formas, desde la represión de las fuerzas de seguridad del Estado hasta la acción de colectivos ligados a partidos políticos, pasando por el accionar de actores criminales que buscan influir en los resultados de las elecciones. Nuestra preocupación es seria. Cuando un proceso democrático se desarrolla bajo un ambiente de miedo, deja de ser plenamente democrático. El riesgo de que existan episodios de violencia electoral en Honduras es alto. Y lo sabemos porque ya lo hemos vivido en las elecciones del 2017. La represión de las protestas postelectorales dejó un saldo trágico de muertes y de heridos. En este momento, la amenaza, creo yo, que proviene de tres fuentes. La primera, las fuerzas de seguridad del Estado. Existe realmente el temor de que en lugar de proteger a los ciudadanos, se utilicen para reprimir manifestaciones o para generar un clima de intimidación. La subordinación política de estas instituciones es un problema histórico. Actualmente, Honduras se encuentra bajo un estado de excepción ilegal que permite la suspensión de derechos y de garantías constitucionales y que de seguir vigente durante las elecciones podría ser instrumentalizada para condicionar o impedir el sufragio en ciertas zonas del país o reprimir a ciudadanos que intenten manifestarse por circunstancias irregulares en los centros de votación. El segundo tema que me preocupa muchísimo son los colectivos partidarios. Hemos visto cómo los grupos organizados vinculados a ciertos partidos políticos actúan con violencia contra opositores o contra ciudadanos que piensan distinto. Su presencia en un contexto electoral es una señal de alerta. En la actualidad, los colectivos afines al oficialismo se han manifestado fuertemente y dicen estar dispuestos al uso de las armas, lo cual sugiere una situación de suma preocupación. Y por otro lado, los actores criminales y no estatales. Honduras sigue siendo un país donde el crimen organizado tiene capacidad de incidir en la política o, más claro, en los políticos. El financiamiento ilícito de campañas y el control territorial de algunos grupos pueden derivar en amenazas o violencias directamente a muchas de las comunidades. Pero la pregunta es, ¿qué se puede hacer para prevenir esta violencia? Y digo 4 cosas rápidamente. Primero, es indispensable que el Estado asuma un compromiso claro de neutralidad y de respeto a los derechos humanos. Esto significa que las fuerzas de seguridad deben garantizar paz. Segundo, necesitamos protocolos claros y públicos de actuación en caso de protestas con mecanismos de rendición de cuentas inmediatos si se cometen diferentes abusos. Tercero, se debe desactivar a los colectivos partidarios que permitan que sigan operando como grupos de choque. Y cuarto, fortalecer la observación internacional nuevamente y la nacional, porque la vigilancia independiente puede disuadir la violencia y visibilizar cualquier intento de manipulación. En conclusión, sí hay efectivamente un riesgo de violencia electoral en Honduras, pero también creo que estamos a tiempo de reducir ese riesgo si hay presión ciudadana, acompañamiento internacional y sobre todo una decisión firme de las autoridades de no repetir errores del pasado, porque la democracia florece en un ambiente de libertad y eso creo que todos lo conocemos.
Great, thank you very much. Before we open it up, and I might come back with a couple of questions at the end, but I want to turn to Manuel, and I think Manuel, you spoke to this a little bit at the top, but to really tell us what you think the issues are that matter most to voters. Is the economy the most important issue, and sort of, I think you gave a good overview, but what's the current state of the Honduran economy, and to what extent will this move the elections either way?
Thanks. I have to say, Gabriela, I don't think the first and the second recommendation is going to happen. I think I don't see the Honduran government truly committing to respecting, you know, a political process during the election where violence will be prevented, and much less the protocols. I'm very doubtful of it, and the tensions are really, really deep. And so it comes back again to the role of the international community and observers. But I think everyone is preparing for a fight, and is troublesome. The electorate basically has one thing in mind, well, 3 things in mind: the economy, insecurity, and corruption, in that order. 2/3 of the electorate really sees that whether it's a problem of employment, economic crisis, or lack of jobs, that really affects their day-to-day thinking and their routines. And then you have about 26% of the electorate who really sees that insecurity is a problem in their day-to-day lives. It's a very strong feeling about it, because on the one hand, the The number of homicides have been declining, but other types of crimes have not. And that's the day-to-day problem for the Honduran average. And then the third issue is corruption. And, at least once every 6 months, there is a emblematic case of corruption that comes across. So those are the issues. Now, from a macroeconomic standpoint, Honduras looks kosher. The IMF says that Honduras is a good economy. They awarded them another loan for $160 million and saying that it's going to grow 3.5%. What they don't say is that it's an economy that lives on migrant money. There were, in 2018, 750,000 Hondurans sending money. Today is 1.2 million remittance senders. It's a large number that is attributed basically to the political deterioration in the country and the inability of cope after COVID with the inflation that was taking place. So the IMF, unfortunately, they tend to rescue dictatorships and let democracies fail and then rescue them. But the bottom line is that you have a serious problem coming next year because in this year remittances are going to grow almost $12 billion from 9.5 billion. It's an outstanding growth of 25% resulting out of migrant fears of being deported. They were sending $350, now they are sending $420 because in case they are deported, they want their relatives to get as much money as they can. But next year it's not going to happen because you have reached a threshold of using your savings and using the top of your disposable income to send as much as you can. And if you add to that the increased number of deportations and the declining migration, every year since 2018 to 2024, you had a median number of new remitters, about 60,000 people. Next year, it's going to be minus 30,000. So it is a drastic change. There is going to be an economic contraction because at the end of the day, 30% of the Honduran economy lives on remittances. There will be a slight decline in exports to this year. Exports to the US have slowed down to minus 5%. And that means there will be less revenue for the total economy. Tourism is not growing either this year. So when you see these three things combined with an international economy that is not going to perform well in 2026, Honduras is going to have a contraction. How difficult, how severe the contraction will be, it may not be too deep, but the problem is that whoever wins is not prepared and has not prepared an economic stabilization approach to deal with these shortcomings, whether it is Libre, Moncada, Nasrallah, or the other candidate. Some of them even think that just by getting Hondurans to go and plant beans, that will, solve the economic problem. One candidate preaches for that, one of the leading candidates. So it's a complete disconnect that is really concerning because in the midst of a polarized society where tensions are growing, violence might take place. On top of that, you're going to see an economic contraction where families in Honduras are concerned that your relatives will be deported. And some of them are experiencing that. You do have a serious problem. It's a bitter pickle.
Thank you. Appreciate that backdrop. That's very helpful. Why don't we go ahead and open it up to questions from folks here in the room? Anybody? Please, I think Michael has the microphone back there, so please go ahead and raise your hands.
Hi, Jordi Zamora from AFP. A quick question about methodology to Manuel. I'm curious about this. You seem to have very, very precise numbers about Honduras coming back to being deported to the country, 30,000. And about the remittances too. How did you manage to calculate those numbers? And
the central bank publishes regular figures. money transfer companies provide you with principal amount data that allows you to track month-to-month transactions, and DHS publishes their reports on deportations. So it's all, it's just a matter of doing a little bit of research.
Thank you. I think we had a question up here. Oh, yep. Mary, you want to go ahead? Go.
I wanted to ask about the issue of polarization in Honduras, something always mentioned. And I wondered about you mentioned citizen observers. Obviously, the parties can have the poll workers, but you mentioned the need for independent citizen observers. In a context of almost hyperpolarization, how can you have a genuinely or a citizen observers who are not polarized themselves? I mean, doesn't that apply to them as well? And what can be done to ensure that they are perceived as neutral?
That's an excellent question. In fact, the CNE, all three commissioners in our meetings, bilateral meetings, I must state, because they were not yet meeting together as a commission, all three of them discussed their concern about finding a truly neutral civil society. And yes, in countries, and we work in many countries that are deeply polarized, what we have tended to do over the years in other places is work with coalitions, and coalitions that balance each other out politically, and in terms of academics, journalists, religious institutions. And I would have to say in Honduras, in the last barometer public opinion poll that I saw would have been 2024, the religious institutions, both leading churches, the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church, have the most public confidence in Honduras. And so that is why it's important to also work with organizations, with the religious institutions in Honduras in particular, because they do hold most public confidence. And while you're trying to provide public confidence in the electoral results, that is why it's important to work in coalitions. I should say that two large coalitions that are doing different efforts, different types of observation, public opinion polling, exit polling, and systematic observation, that we're providing technical assistance to the systematic piece, are coming together. And it is a role that we're playing as an international community and facilitating dialogue amongst these different actors. And that, I would say, it is feasible. It has been done in Honduras, where you can come up with systematic data that the CNE and the public believe in its credibility.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for such interesting insights. My name is Henry Large, and I'm a PhD candidate in Latin American Studies. And I wanted to ask a question on the national security element that was touched on before, specifically the question of China. So as was mentioned, in 2023, Honduras established relations with China, and in doing so, severed relations with Taiwan, becoming the last Latin American country to make this diplomatic switch. But during this election cycle, I've read that Nasrallah and Asfura have both pledged to reestablish relations with Taiwan if they are elected, pointing to the Honduran shrimp industry, which has really taken a hit, having had a really preferential market access in Taiwan before 2023. So I'd like to know from anyone, if the Libre party leaves power in this election, do you see a scenario in which Honduras would reestablish relations with Taiwan, or do you think the perhaps logistical difficulties or domestic concerns or even pressure from China could prevent such a switch from happening?
Great, thank you. I don't know, Gabriela, if you heard that question, but I think, no sé si usted escuchó la pregunta sobre China y la posibilidad de cambiar recognición, especialmente con los candidatos que no son de Libre.
Sí. No escuché con fidelidad la pregunta, pero a lo que entendí, quiero decir que el giro diplomático de Honduras hacia la República Popular de China fue un movimiento, como todos lo sabemos, geopolítico de gran impacto, y no con esto estoy diciendo que fue un impacto positivo. Pero en lo electoral debemos de ser más claros y decir que la mayor amenaza no proviene de Beijing, sino de nuestras propias prácticas corruptas y de la fragilidad de nuestras instituciones que hemos hablado en el transcurso de este espacio. ¿Podría China tener un rol de influencia? Sí, principalmente a través de la cooperación económica, de proyectos de infraestructura y narrativas diplomáticas que buscan proyectar poder blando, pero un rol maligno directo en el proceso electoral hondureño no es así, a mi juicio. No creo que sea tan probable. Lo que sí nosotros, y aquí aprovecho que debemos de vigilar, es que la relación con China no se traduzca en opacidad de contratos, concesiones o financiamiento, que ya lo estamos viendo. La experiencia de otros países demuestra que cuando estas relaciones se manejan sin controles, se convierten en espacios totalmente y abiertos de corrupción que terminan debilitando la democracia. Y vaya que la democracia está bastante débil en mi país.
Muchas gracias, Gabriela. Y la pregunta también es, dos de los candidatos presidenciales han dicho que si sean elegidos, que van a cambiar las relaciones.
En efecto,
¿Usted piensa que eso podría pasar o logísticamente va a ser imposible?
En efecto, hay dos candidatos, tanto Nasri Alfura como Salvador Nasralla han mencionado de que irían por la vía de restitución de la relación con Taiwán, que debo decir ha sido un amigo histórico de mi país. Yo sí creo que podría darse, pero todos también aquí sabemos que una relación diplomática no se da de la noche a la mañana, menos cómo salió Taiwán en este preciso gobierno. Así que yo creo que podría encaminarse a un diálogo diplomático, a un acercamiento que realmente podría, pues, concluir nuevamente en esa relación que tanto Honduras la requiere.
Thank you very much. And Deborah, Manuel, do you want to add anything?
Sure, I would just add that during our mission, we didn't hear about PRC influence during the elections. But from NDI's work globally, I could say a little bit that the PRC does have an extensive toolkit for electoral influence. In other elections, we have seen in terms of funding parties and candidates, pressure against businesses, or cyber attacks and information influence campaigns. As Gabriela noted, the influence efforts are really goes beyond the campaign periods and includes influence in terms of academic circles, media, and even apparently through innocuous trade missions that sometimes include sessions on the advantages of the PRC model and at the subnational level in particular. Strong democratic institutions, including Congress's independent journalists and citizen networks that provide oversight, are the ways to raise awareness and shed light on any harmful aspects of this authoritarian foreign influence.
Perfect. Thank you. Manuel, anything to add?
I don't think the relations will be, I think the relations with China will have to continue. But what's likely going to happen is that all the trade negotiations that have been going on for the past 9 months will probably be reviewed or stopped. And there will definitely be some relief with regards to the shrimp industry, because that's been an obvious case of damage, intentional damage.
Thank you. There's a question up here.
Good morning. My name's Aaron, and I lead VHC, an NGO working in health and development in Central America. And I'm curious, what are you hearing from the various presidential candidates about just their dialogue around NGOs and CSOs and trust? And have any of them made very specific statements about their intent for um, either trust or distrust of NGOs in the future for informal or formal regulatory changes?
Great, thank you. Gabriela, perhaps we could start with you. La pregunta tiene que ver con algún diálogo acerca de las ONGs y cómo los candidatos ven regulaciones contra las ONGs o intentos de regular las ONGs. ¿Cómo es el diálogo con los candidatos en cuanto a este sector?
Sí, me gustaría dividir rápidamente la pregunta en dos momentos. ¿Cómo es la relación que tiene el actual gobierno con las diferentes organizaciones de sociedad civil? Debo decir que lamentamos decir que no hay una buena comunicación. De hecho, no existe comunicación en la mayoría de los casos. Y vemos cómo en el transcurso de estos 3 años y medio del gobierno se ha promovido el cierre o el silencio de las organizaciones de distinta manera. Persecución penal o señalamientos que no tienen ningún sustento atrás de ellos o un ataque totalmente visceral por la administración a los representantes de las organizaciones de sociedad civil que tienen un discurso o una opinión distinta a la que tiene el gobierno en sinnúmero de los temas, ya sea combate frontal contra la corrupción, transparencia, rendición de cuentas, gobernabilidad, institucionalidad, etcétera. Pero también vemos que los candidatos, en su mayoría, que están precisamente en esta carrera presidencial, pues hay un acercamiento bastante limpio, claro y contundente con organizaciones de sociedad civil, llámese iglesias, llámese empresa privada, organizaciones no gubernamentales, organizaciones de la sociedad civil, en donde hay un poco más de apertura de escuchar, de invitar a participar y de establecer que en el próximo gobierno pues van a ser parte de todo lo que es el Estado. Así que eso, por supuesto que nosotros ponemos totalmente atención a ello porque nos parece un componente importante en donde todos y todas debemos de ser escuchados con el respeto a los derechos humanos.
Thank you.
Maybe I would just add one more thing is that maybe about a year ago, and we haven't heard anything since, but Congress did initiate a commission to look into organizations, Honduran organizations receiving USAID funds. And so that is concerning, obviously. It's a warning sign, but to my knowledge, that has not moved forward.
Thank you. Over there. Peter, did you have a question? Sorry, then we'll go to you next.
Thank you. Thank you all for your remarks today. It's actually kind of related. I was wondering, since the start of the year, the Trump administration has pulled back financial support for independent journalists, civil society organizations that had been engaging in governance, anti-corruption work. So I was wondering if you could touch a little bit on the impact of those decisions, what the current capacity is of organizations to engage in the kind of watchdog activities that are needed for the election and afterwards. And then as well, if there's been an impact on the international observation efforts as a result of those decisions.
Gabriela can go into this a bit deeper, but I would say the impact is threefold. It's not just direct U.S. assistance for non-governmental work in Honduras on health care sector, to environmental, to journalists, to watchdog organizations. It's also had an impact on European funding, and a lot of the US funding was coupled with European funding to the Honduran administration around environmental and other issues. And so, it's gone beyond just having a domestic impact. It's also, or to the non-governmental organizations, but also to the government of Honduras. I would also say that in terms of capacity, the will is there. We're seeing that with the domestic observation. The will is there. They don't have funding, but they are pulling together their efforts, their human resources. They're pulling together all of these efforts, and private sector has committed to funding some of these efforts. And so I think that they're doing it. We have the will, and thanks to the National Endowment for Democracy that funded our electoral mission, but is also funding our technical assistance to provide to any of these domestic efforts. The OAS, I think, has secured funding, and that is great news. I don't know if the Carter Center or others have secured funding, and so it obviously will have an impact on how large of a delegation, given that the U.S. is one of the larger funders of the OAS. Thanks.
Thank you, Deborah. Let me just ask Gabriela quickly. La pregunta tiene que ver con el impacto de la eliminación de USAID en la elección y los recursos.
Sí, totalmente de acuerdo con lo vertido por Débora. El impacto ha sido tremendo, fuertísimo, y por supuesto que se ha debilitado el accionar de muchas de las organizaciones, podría yo decir de casi todas las organizaciones, en donde nos hemos visto debilitados en algunos espacios, en nuestro caso de lucha frontal contra la corrupción, y en otros temas en defensa de los derechos humanos. Íbamos por un camino de educación, de concientizar precisamente al ciudadano, y eso ha sido trastocado. Pero también quiero decir que hay un espíritu de lucha muy fuerte que tenemos los hondureños y las hondureñas, y que eso no nos ha detenido para tratar de seguir creando espacios, impactando en lo que sabemos hacer y darnos a conocer y a escuchar, porque sociedad civil tiene argumento, tiene una posición y tiene mucho trabajo para poder colaborar con el mismo gobierno, con los mismos partidos políticos, y creo que estamos en esa vía. Así que esperamos seguir trabajando, y bueno, ha sido un reto enorme. El impacto ha sido muy, muy fuerte.
Thank you. I believe we had a question on that side of the room. Sorry.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Matt Goldmark. I'm a professor at Florida State. So I've appreciated everything, and we've talked a lot about multilaterals and multinationals and sort of competition between global powers. And I'd love to know a little more about, if you're able to speak to the way that you see this election impacting or being thought about as a regional question as well, right? Not just beyond or as a global one, but how it's impacting like the local and neighboring countries as well.
Manuel, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. My immediate answer is no. Okay, the outcome of the election, the count of the votes, will generate definitely a political debate, and it will raise questions from the international community about the validity of the results, unless there is an outstanding defeat of Libre. But even in that case, because there is no coalition, I see that this is a heavily contested election. Whoever wins will win by a small margin. Now, whether the geopolitical issues will be brought into the surface? I will think not, because China, which is the main issue in the US foreign policy agenda as the malign force in the world, is not central to the political um, contest in Honduran elections. So I doubt it. However, I do think that US foreign policy will take a turn south on Central America soon over the influence of China and other malign forces or other, political extracontinental forces that are affecting regional stability. And probably you will see countries like Nicaragua being put on the spot. That means that Honduras knows a little bit about that, and they've been playing a very low profile in the international scenario, not trying to present themselves as too close to Ortega. At the same time, President Castro has her own way of not saying the right stuff at the right time. But I, I, I mean, I don't think as a geopolitical issue, Honduras will be front and center, but the elections themselves will be a real issue of consideration by the international community and by the US foreign policy establishment. And that, I think, will be the matter.
Perhaps I would just add to what Manuel said, and that there is a concern within Central America with the international community of democratic backsliding and sort of this trend that I agree with Manuel that only the elections, credible and transparent elections, will help ease any concern of further democratic backsliding.
Gabriela, no sé si usted quiere responder, si la elección va a tener interés regional, si va a ser un asunto regional para, bueno, más generalmente.
Por supuesto. Creería que la preocupación de la mayoría de los hondureños es latente, porque si seguimos bajo la ruta del actual gobierno, en donde se autodenomina socialista democrático, sin duda se cerrarán muchas puertas. Cuando una administración apoya a países que ya lo mencionaron, como Venezuela o Nicaragua, y siguen cierta guía de estos países, pues evidentemente será una ruptura entre otros países que históricamente han sido aliados de Honduras y que ha existido un beneficio mutuo de diferentes maneras. Así que la preocupación es bastante grande. Vemos con mucho recelo de que uno de los candidatos de esta actual contienda precisamente va en esa línea de seguir al socialismo y a los países de izquierda. Así que, bueno, Honduras está poniendo mucha atención a este tema y esperamos entonces que gane precisamente la democracia el 30 de noviembre para seguir viviendo en la misma como hasta ahora al hondureño común y la mayoría pues nos ha gustado vivir.
Thank you. And I see we have a few questions, so maybe what we'll do is just gather remaining questions and turn it back to the panel. So starting over there.
Hi there, thank you for being here today. My question revolves around the role that historical memory plays in fostering a culture of public distrust in elections. Like, you have a population that has lived through a 2009 coup and distrust in 2017. So is the solution to fostering public trust in institutions and whatnot as simple as implementing the solutions that we've spoken about today? Or is there something far more ingrained in Honduran society that is just living on in these elections and it's manifesting in what we're seeing today? Thank you.
Thank you. I think you had a question as well.
Yeah, so I'm curious to ask you about the mega prison proposed in Swan Islands.
I never read there was a budget that was outlined for it. And also, uh, do you think there could be a problem where China and US both have interest in that prison, and that could somehow backfire that, not just environmentally, but what do you think that can happen? Also, what do the political candidates like Rixie and Nazir Ali think of it as well?
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Roger. I'm from the permanent mission of Honduras to the OAS. Um, eh, First, I would like to, I don't know if I can do my remarks in Spanish, I will feel a little bit more comfortable. Primero que nada, quisiera agradecer este espacio. Creo que este tipo de diálogos realmente fortalecen las expectativas que tenemos nosotros en cuanto a mejorar el proceso electoral y a mejorar la democracia en nuestro país. Uno de los, para mí, uno de los elementos claves que se han tocado en este foro es el tema de la polarización que tenemos en nuestra sociedad. Tenemos fuertes temas en el sentido de que, por ejemplo, aquí se ha hablado de una izquierda, se ha hablado de una derecha, temas o conceptos que en Honduras realmente me interesaría mucho conocer la interpretación de estos conceptos, ¿no? Porque para algunos sectores, solo por dar un ejemplo breve, hablar de anticonceptivos es ser de izquierda. Y pues obviamente en países como este, donde son derechos que simplemente ya están, como decimos en inglés, they are taken for granted, ¿verdad? Lo mismo sucede en Honduras, muchos de estos derechos no se toman como por sentado, ¿no? Entonces, sí, esa polarización, ese tema de ideas puede llevar a un conflicto a veces hasta innecesario porque es un tema de que no se está interpretando correctamente lo que significa los componentes políticos, ¿no? Otro de los temas que me gustaría hacer mención es que em, desde la misión permanente de Honduras, pues obviamente nos hemos puesto en completa disposición con la Secretaría General de la OEA, tanto con la administración anterior, con el secretario Luis Almagro, como ahora con el nuevo secretario Albert Randín, a tal punto, y me gustaría mencionar eso porque creo que es bastante importante, a tal punto de que la comunicación que tiene la Secretaría para el Fortalecimiento de la Democracia en la OEA con el CNE es una comunicación directa. O sea, tanto la presidenta del CNE, la abogada Cosette López, ella manda sus comunicaciones de manera directa con la Secretaría para el Fortalecimiento de la Democracia. Y yo creo que eso demuestra esa transparencia de parte pues, del Estado, del gobierno, en cuanto a que la OEA tenga una observación transparente, sin bloqueos y sin ningún tipo de injerencias. Me parece que es sumamente elemental las misiones observadoras internacionales porque creo que estas son las que realmente tienen independencia en cuanto a intereses políticos o en cuanto a intereses ideológicos. Es muy difícil en nuestra sociedad hondureña precisamente por el tema de polarización. Hay organizaciones de la sociedad civil que pues apoyan a un sector, otros apoyan a otro, y está bien, la diversidad de pensamiento es buena, el debate es bueno, pero sí es, y esto también pues iría en materia como, o en aras de hacer la pregunta de este conservatorio, ¿cómo por ejemplo puede el ciudadano hondureño participar en política sin que sea visto como un detractor o como que sin ser visto como es oficialista? ¿Cómo puede el ciudadano hondureño, sobre todo los jóvenes, involucrarse, ser parte de un cambio democrático, de un cambio positivo en nuestro país, sin que se le tilde o sin que se le tache? Porque entonces la gente, y sobre todo los jóvenes, no se quieren involucrar. ¿Por qué? Porque tienen miedo a que si me uno con esto, entonces ya me tachan de que soy, y puedo utilizar un montón de adjetivos, o si voy con los otros, también. Entonces, creo que es importante eso. La OEA, pues oficialmente declaró que en el 2017 Honduras fue víctima de un fraude electoral. Muchas organizaciones pues, no se pronunciaron de manera tan contundente con respecto a esto. Hasta ahora pues ya se dice abiertamente, ¿no? Y pues para las elecciones siguientes, las del 2021, uno de las consignas que tenía el pueblo y que yo creo que era muy del pueblo, era de que había que salir a votar de manera masiva. Y decíamos muchos en redes sociales, el voto masivo mata fraude. Y yo creo que eso es elemental y también es muy, pero muy importante hacer el llamado a la ciudadanía a que salga a votar y darles la confianza de que hay un proceso seguro, de que hay un proceso transparente y de que la decisión soberana del pueblo es la que siempre debe prevalecer en estos procesos. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Okay, great. So we've three good questions. So Deborah, why don't we start with you, and we'll go around and then close it up.
Maybe I can take the two questions related to historic memory and the youth because I think I see them as connected. I'll leave Manuel and others to talk to the prison on security issues. It's there are longer term, obviously, longer term solutions that are not just at the political elite level of dialogue, right? Dialogue has happened. There have been agreements that can take place to move things along now. In the long term, of course, it's civic education, right? And it's instilling at a young age civics, right? And it's participation as a voter. Yes, for sure, youth feel used, right? We work with political parties, we work with all of the political parties in Honduras, and youth feel that they're used to just get and to mobilize the vote. But they can participate in other ways. We've also worked with youth debates. And I know UNA is conducting right now debates throughout the country, and there are a lot of youth involved in that, a lot of students. But they can also participate as citizen observers, not as a political party effort. They don't only have to be involved in political parties. They can participate in politics. And NDI, as a democratic organization, as an organization focused on strengthening processes and institutions, we believe not in ideology, we believe in values and human rights, freedom, diversity, the values that you spoke about, Roger. And so I think I'm in agreement with much of what you said. And these are longer term issues that can start with the elections, but certainly don't end with the elections.
Manuel.
Just very briefly, I mean, historical memory is a situation that is shaped by at least three markers. One is the social norms in the society. And Honduran society, Central American society in general, has a deep belief that everyone steals. Todo el mundo roba. Los políticos roban. So you can debunk that through education and through practice. But there are two other markers that are very critical. One is witnessing of experiences, of instances of practices that go against the system. Corruption, for example, is emblematic. Only this year alone, you have two questionable issues of abuses of political authority and abuses of funds, Cedesol and the election process that took place early in this year. And then it's behavior. Behavior, or other times referred to as modeling in a society, plays a critical role in shaping historical memory. Your collection of past events, of individuals who have played an honest role, is really emblematic. When you think in the political history of Honduras, what name comes to mind of being an honest politician in the past 40 years? Can anyone bring up one name? Perhaps Reina, President Reina. I mean, and it's not because he's a liberal. I mean, you had the other president who was owner of the La Prensa newspaper, who used to, not La Prensa, the other newspaper, who used to write the editorials while being president and praising the Honduran government for doing a good job. So there is, when you see those three markers and none of them really play in favor of honesty, in favor of debunking corruption, then you have really deep-rooted disbeliefs in the institutions and in the leaders that come across. It's very difficult to deal with that. And that adds to the issue of polarization. Historically, Honduras has not been a polarized society. But since the coup, there is a number of events that really shape three things: changing the language, two, an oppositional stance over the other. You were in favor or against the coup. And three, a kind of behavior over the actions that politicians and leaders will have over that oppositional stance. And today is close to violent. So it's not just name calling when you talk about a polarized Honduras. It's a fact. You're either a nationalist or you are libre, and I don't like you. And the discrediting of all of the political parties is deep, as well as the discrediting of all of the political leaders. Todos tienen cola. And it's true. I mean, with all due respect, I mean, all of the current candidates have an unattractive tale of past history. So the Honduran electorate is really confronted with a polarized context because there is dislike, there is opposition, and at the same time with a collective memory that tells you what? That nothing is really attractive to you. And that's, when you put that together with the upcoming economic contraction, it is concerning.
Well, Gabriela, maybe we could turn to you to close it out and happy to summarize the. No sé si escuchaste bien las preguntas o si quiere que yo repito.
Está bien, las escuché. Muchas gracias, Eric. Más que respuestas, podría ser una serie de comentarios muy cortos. Ya creo que nosotros pasamos, no solamente como hondureños, sino que en el mundo, esa clasificación y esa conceptualización de qué es la derecha y qué es la izquierda. Yo creo que debemos sumergirnos a las acciones y entonces ese es un tema que nos va a quedar bastante claro. Me gustaría establecer el origen de la polarización. Y hemos visto de manera histórica cómo los gobiernos, y hablo en plural, cómo los gobiernos juegan realmente a polarizar a los diferentes sectores cuando estos no cumplen sus expectativas o no están alineados a los discursos precisamente del oficialismo. Nosotros vemos de manera positiva la acreditación de los organismos internacionales porque la participación básicamente va a sumar o va a abonar a la transparencia, a que se respeten los derechos humanos, a que el proceso sea justo. Pero, tal como lo dije hace unos minutos atrás, creo que nosotros, los hondureños, debemos de apostar a la observación doméstica, a la observación interna, porque nosotros realmente conocemos quién es quién en nuestro país y de manera comprometida y responsable establecer precisamente de manera educativa a los ciudadanos quiénes son las personas que están participando, cómo se va a llevar este proceso electoral, qué es lo que queremos mostrar no solamente a nosotros como hondureños, sino que al mundo de lo que está pasando en el proceso electoral. Creo que eso es altamente importante. No podemos desacreditar a las organizaciones nacionales estableciendo si respondemos a intereses políticos partidarios. Yo creo que nuestro caminar de muchas organizaciones de sociedad civil que hay en Honduras tienen un trabajo de mucho respeto y que realmente como derecho humano debemos de participar en la vida democrática, no solamente tomando el voto, sino que realmente defendiéndolo y estableciendo lo que está bien y lo que está mal. Creo que nosotros como hondureños debemos de apostar a nosotros mismos y tener, por supuesto, las puertas abiertas a esa veeduría, a esa observación internacional que tanto lo ocupamos en este momento.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for joining this excellent conversation today. I think in spite of our technical difficulties at the top, I think really got deep into these issues. And it's clear that while significant challenges remain, clearly there's a good deal of interest both nationally and internationally in supporting the electoral process in Honduras. So we really look forward to staying on top of things here. And if you could all please join me in thanking these terrific panelists.
Thank you. Thank you.